Thank you very much, Valeria. Good morning, friends, colleagues. Hello, everyone. I know that we have people from more than 100 countries in the audience. There are two very trendy buzzwords being thrown around, AI and ESG, artificial intelligence and environmental social governance, respectively. How are they interconnected? Are they interconnected? And how can artificial intelligence help us with ESG technology? This is precisely what we're going to be discussing at the panel session. We have representatives from big corporations and startups, Russian and foreign, at the session, and it's very interesting to discuss what the big corporations are doing and what the startups are doing, and what is the benefit for the business, and how does the ESG fit into the picture. A lot of interesting things to discuss. I am happy to introduce our speakers. Dr. Tom Gruber, co-founder and CTO of Siri, head of Advanced Development Group at Apple, and Impact Advisor at Humanistic.AI. He's someone who, for the first time, applied the notion of ontology to artificial intelligence. Tom is joining us remotely. Shukri Dabaghi, Senior Vice President for SaaS, responsible for Asia Pacific, Japan, Australia, and other regions. He is here, offline. He works in Asia Pacific, Japan, Australia, Russia, Middle East, and Africa. The company is responsible for providing solutions that make our lives better. They have the Data for Good initiative, and we'll be happy to learn more about it from Shukri. Andrey Chernogorov, here in person as well. He is the founder and CEO of the Moscow-based startup called Bidzaar.com. He, for the very first time, developed a methodology for SWIFT, and he has a friendly verification of companies for their compliance with ESG principles. And before the session, when we were preparing, I asked Andrey to check us for this compliance with ESG principles. Very interesting results. Looking forward to hearing more about this. And Ambarish Mitra, Chief Product Officer and co-founder of a very famous startup called Greyparrot, providing solutions for AI-based solutions for waste management analysis. And before we kick off, before we start our discussions, let's watch a short video.
The environment and society are ever more influenced by people and businesses with the development of science and technology. Social responsibility, both of people and businesses, grows as well. In this connection, the role that tech companies play is particularly important. Given the degree of their impact on modern society, it is tech companies that drive the ESG transformation. High technology and artificial intelligence help tackle many ESG issues. They include minimizing the environmental impact, ensuring equal rights and accessibility of services for all users, protecting companies and customers from cyber attacks, collecting data underlying the most effective decisions to make life better. Sber has also succeeded in using that technology to address environmental and social issues. What other sustainable development opportunities do high technology and artificial intelligence offer? Can ESG decisions powered by AI create a launch platform for business growth and economic well-being? ESG, new opportunities for a future.
And just a bit more stats to build on the information on the video. The Swedish researchers published a research in Nature journal, and it shows and proves that AI can improve the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations in terms of the environment by 90%. As for the social challenges and social services, improvement is 80%, and in terms of the economy, 70% improvement is in the pipeline. These are huge figures. That's really exciting. So let's ask the audience, what about your companies and organizations? How do you use AI there to implement ESG tasks? I'd like to ask our technical guys to launch the voting. You have a QR code on the bottom of the screen. Scan it to go to the voting. And as we vote, it is my great pleasure to ask a question to Tom Gruber, our first speaker. The question would be, simple on the one hand, on the other hand, it will be quite complicated. How can AI help the ESG?
Hi, nice to meet you, and thanks for offering me this opportunity. The AI is going to change everything. In fact, it's been said to transform the world as much as the invention of fire. It's going to be a big deal, and no one questions that now. The question is, can we make it do the right things? And so ESG is not just about governance for morality and ethics, but it's also about a particular angle on it, which is the global survival, right? Environmental survival, social survival. And you think, well, what does technology have to do with that? Well, it can have a lot to do with it. First, it essentially, that Swedish study you mentioned, it's basically said that across the board, almost all these activities of human striving for the SDGs are going to be affected by the productivity gains of machine learning and artificial intelligence. In other words, anything that involves vision, anything that involves somebody looking at or examining, studying something visual, or language, or control of a physical, like a robotic arm, all of these things are going to be on the optimization of AI. They're going to get better because of AI, a lot better, faster, okay? And in fact, it doesn't even have to be computer vision as the input or language as the input. Any system, any process that has sensors, can gather data, can change how it reacts to the data, measure it, and repeat it, can be accelerated by AI. And that's, I think, partly why all of these estimates of the productivity gains are incredible. Now, that means that, of course, the ESG activities can be accelerated that way. But in this particular case, we have a special responsibility to do it the right way. And that means being aware of the consequences of choices we made in the technology. I'll give you a simple example. Computer vision makes it easy to recognize whether a human is in the room and who the human is. And you can use that to actually help people who are elderly live at home with dignity. And they can be safely be able to live by themselves. Maybe it keeps them from hurting themselves or forgetting to take their medicine, things like this. But that exact same technology can be used for surveillance by a government to have as a surveillance state. And so because this technology is so powerful and can go either way, there's a moral imperative that we use it ethically and under ESG governance kind of thing. And then finally, the final point here is basically that there's been a lot of concern about the problem of inequality that arises from AI. And there's really two kinds of this. One is that the AI of today is being trained on at least human data from an unrepresentative sample of humanity. And that means there'll be biases against certain populations or genders and so on. That will probably change because of the basic need to address actual statistically relevant humans. But the other part of the argument is that because AI is, you can make money from it, then only the rich will succeed. And that actually, the good news about AI is that it's a computer software technology, and it actually is free to distribute, almost free. So we can take what would normally become a thing that drives monopolies and inequality and turn it into an egalitarian force if we insist that these inventions of AI are distributed to everyone, basically free, because anyone with a computer can use it. And people can make money on other kinds of things, like the services provided by that. I think that's going to be part of the way we're going to have a big breakthrough on the ESG, is basically taking things and by aiming a different way, how we use the technology, we get a much better impact.
Thank you very much for that input. Tom, thank you. Could you please show the voting result? Right. That's great. Is AI used to solve ESG tasks in your company? Yes, 37%. No, 44%. I don't know, around 20%. So a bit more than 1/3 of companies use AI to go along the ESG track. Yeah, you know, the mug is also always half empty or half full. You know, and on the other hand, we can say that 1/3 of companies have a great potential to use AI to achieve ESG goals, and these are good news. Next question to Shukri Dabaghi from SAS. Shukri, you are working with data. You are working with huge amounts of data, volumes of data. You cover the world from Australia and Russia and Africa, the entire world except for America. You have Data for Good. That's a great project, great story. It would be great if you could touch upon Data for Good, and if you could tell about the business potential that AI has to resolve ESG tasks. How much money do we have there?
Thank you for the question. Data for Good is part of our principles of how we run ESG as a principle within SAS. The SAS Institute has been, you know, an organization that has been in existence for more than 45 years, and we would like to believe that we've been running within the ESG principles. Now at least it has an acronym, but at that time, maybe many years ago, we didn't consider it as much. It was our kind of our operating model. Data for Good is part of the principles, and let me explain the overall principles that run our ESG methodology within the company. So first and foremost is our governance thought process. To us, we believe ESG is, it has to be part of your being as an organization. In that sense, we believe in it and have believed in it in 45 years. And this is how we have the processes and the policies and the way we conduct ourselves in every day in every shape or form. This defines as well our existence as an organization and our belief in this particular call of action. The way we treat our employees, the way we allow our teams and our people to be able to work on things that drive them and drive their ESG culture and drive their ESG acceptance is a big part of who we are as a company. And that influences a lot of the initiatives we run on Data for Good, because these are initiatives that SAS runs in its core as a belief of trying to reciprocate back into the society. So the things we run on healthcare, for example, and how we're able to help in defining, for example, predefining cancer in certain things, and a lot of things we run, for example, on disaster relief, for example, that we've been able to do in helping the government of Nepal and some of the global institutes in being able to relieve that country when it was hit with a very bad earthquake. And a lot of other areas where, for example, we've provided our technology and our people's time for free in helping putting together, for example, the Special Olympics that was run a few years ago in the United Arab Emirates in Abu Dhabi, and how our technology was able to track all of these athletes with special requirements so that we can keep an eye on how they're performing, if they need special attention and care, and so on. So these are some of the things we run in the Data for Good as well. education is a big part of our belief, and it's a big parcel as well of our own overall principles. It stands very firm in our commitment towards the future as the company. We've invested as an organization over $1 billion in the AI platform on an annual basis, and education ranks very highly in it. If you see how much we've, I think in the last year alone, our number of free downloads for educational institutes and for students escalated by 60%. And that's just our ability to provide such a platform for people to be able to experiment and use, especially for the younger talent and the new generations coming up. So these are general the definitions we go with. The second question you asked me is how will ESG define, let's say, what's the worth, what's the figure of it, if we can define it in such a way. Well, look, in my belief, ESG is becoming an ever stronger participant in how the markets and the investors and the general public believe that they look into the organizations they're investing in, or they're buying from, or they're engaging in. And that will create a factor in the pricing of any organization. Like, for example, SaaS, where we believe that every organization and every vendor we deal with, we have to look into their ESG component as a part of our engagement with them. Similarly, the general market is going to start to put a premium on that particular ESG component of every organization. Now, you might ask, how much of that is that ESG? How can you price that?
Exactly. AI for ESG.
Yes.
What is the market for this?
At the moment,
what is the figure for this market when you?
At the moment, I think it's not definable quite a lot as in dollar figures. But what we know for some of the data points we have is that it's growing at a CAGR of 15% annually. So I believe at some point it will be a very much a defining factor for organizations in being able to attract investment and keep investors with them. The question is, how can you define it? How can AI define that particular area? And at the moment, there's no defined data points available within the markets. But AI can do a wonderful thing in being able to go through a massive amount of unstructured data, and it can pick up many of the performances of these organizations and how they conduct themselves, and being able through a modeling exercise and being able to understand and put a factor or a score, an ESG score for those organizations going forward. And when that starts to happen more consistently, then you'll be able to provide, and you'll be able to see a more definitive price point and value being put. At this moment, it's still very much unstructured, and hence why we cannot really define a figure yet completely.
Mm-hmm. Спасибо.
Understood. Thank you. My question to Andrey Chernogorov, who has built his business on AI fully. This is AI for ESG we're talking about. Andrey, who are your customers? How does your business look like? What is the potential? Whom you focus on among startups, I mean. Thank you. ESG is a great framework that builds a B2B relations in the right direction, because the world is very global, and Tom was very right in saying that, what are you doing it for? For some good goal. And let's take companies from S&P 500. 95% of them have a good ESG reporting. They accept the right projects and they manage their sustainable growth. The other question is that, the other side of the medal is that this is a very small proportion of companies in the world, because in the world we have 400 million enterprises. And obviously you cannot analyze all this data lake manually. You know, a person consists by 60% is water. The same for the businesses. You know, it's the vendors for large businesses. And the question that we are resolving is, how can we use advanced technologies and AI to move AI to and ESG to the mass market? How can companies can check their vendors and partners? How can companies can audit themselves? How can they understand their own level of sustainability? And obviously, technologies here have to be AI-driven. Russia can show a very exciting precedent. The transparency and openness for the businesses is very high. The data lake for the businesses is huge, more than 30 databases that are open source. All can be machine read. It would be a crime not to leverage this data to contribute to the sustainability. This is what we are doing. We are working with the current data in databases, stored in databases. We're working with the disclosure of the information. We're working with the businesses, and together with the ML technologies, we take the information to make the ESG scoring. We give this feedback to the businesses, and we help them grow to this end, help them improve ESG. Our goal is in the next year to take on board 100,000 companies in Russia and check them on ESG criteria, based on ESG criteria. This is unprecedented. You asked me about other options, other companies. I said that I would say that only Cavadis, a French company, that announced that it has checked around 80,000 companies. The significant growth is possible only with AI technologies, because you remember the benchmark is 400 million companies. But is it in demand actually? I mean, large companies have a lot of ESG ratings. We have ESG ratings, but is it relevant for SMEs? Yeah, the financial market is pressuring the large businesses. The financial market gives the negative as well as positive impetus for the large businesses to be more ESG focused, and the ESG is feeling the pressure from all sides. But at the same time, the mission of the large businesses and the key success factor of a large business is to relay these parameters and requirements to their counterparties, which are usually SMEs. So if you want to work with a large business, you have to be as ESG oriented as your partner, as your big partner, because you can contribute to the sustainability of this large company, or you can chip away from this sustainability. You know, it's like this chain law. The chain is as strong as its weakest link, and the ESG challenges are mostly related with the vendors. That's good. 100,000 scores that you're going to do. You're going to do these scores, and then you're going to distribute them. What's the business model? Yeah, this is a marketplace. These scores are available to all of the participants of the marketplace. You can take them and you can use them and sell them to many companies. We are doing the international cross-verification so that these scores can be used in international activities on the global scale, because in Russia, we are a unique platform, and that means that the demand will grow, because all the ESG methodologies, like AGI, for instance, they mean that you need to disclose information about your supply chain, and that means that you need to do checkups for hundreds of thousands of companies. Great. What about Sber? Now, you have said that you have monitored us, you have looked at us, used the information from open sources, because we didn't provide you any information. So, could you tell us about ourselves? Yes, you have not filled out our questionnaire. We have a multi-layered system. The largest large, and so on and so forth. Sber received 79 scores out of 100. This is a golden ESG status. Now, what were the problems? Maybe you're interested in that. Yeah. Sber did not disclose data on carbon footprint. At least our algorithm could not find it in open source As for social, you have shown a low participation of women in managing bodies. At the same time, on the executive team, we have quite a lot of girls, actually, quite a lot of ladies. Well, the algorithm also did not find the information about hiring the minorities in larger sense of the world. If you specify, we're talking about disabled people. This information is missing from the open source. And as for the G, 99%. Corporate governance, well, no questions here. Thank you very much. That's really instructive to know. As for the disabled people, we have a special policy to hire and recruit this vulnerable group of people, but there's a problem with publicity. Yes, thank you very much for that feedback. That is a scoring that will help us to be better. Next question to Ambarish Mitra. Ambarish, starting from 1997, you have been working in startups. He has created a web portal in India to support the human rights for women. He has created a leading company in AR, Bidzaar, and then he changed his course, changed his track. He is working on AI in ESG, and he has a new project now. And I have a question to you, Ambarish. How AI is used in your case for ESG? Why have you selected it in the first place? Why is this an exciting area? How do you see the market, and how do you use AI for that?
Thanks. It's good to be here. Hi, everybody. My previous company was one of the world's largest augmented reality companies called Bidzaar. It was like a pioneering business started in 2010. Very large-scale artificial intelligence and deep learning was used because the mission of that company was to recognize everything in the world, almost like creating the Wikipedia of the physical world, like a visual search algorithm, and make it editable so that anybody can add information, because humans are largely very visual creatures. We learn things very visually. If I'm curious about a plant or curious about a car or a building, it's hard to describe it on a search engine. I can just look at it and get to know more about it. That was a beautiful part of the engineering. There was a lot of excitement. While I was building that company, one of our greatest revenue channels was from marketing revenues from fizzy drinks and majority of our consumer packaged goods. And as part of me was not very excited about it, because I initially created this platform to help with literacy, and I felt that there are 1 billion people in the world who cannot read and write, but they can talk, and they've used technologies like Siri. What if they had a visual version as well? Like you look at something and you also ask a question, so it like creates a visual and an audio-based knowledge graph, which can make information access very useful, which is, I feel, almost access to information should be a fundamental human right. When that was going on, my conscience said, like, I created this technology for one use case, but it continuously is going down the path of just and I'm here talking as an individual entrepreneur, not as a business CEO. And I wanted to do something very different. And at the birth of Greyparrot with my co-founder, Michaela Druckmann, we realized that actually one of the greatest issues and crises of our time is this $15 trillion industry of packaged goods, which leads to 2.5 billion tons of solid waste in our oceans, in our landfills, and incineration plants, which is a huge issue. And there's also an opportunity, which is a big mega trend, The world is getting digitized, right? That's one trend happening. Another trend happening is decarbonization. But one of the greatest carbon footprints is this whole plastic or wider waste crisis. Neither is it digitized nor is it decarbonized, because you may not know this statistic, but less than 1% of all world's recyclable actually gets recycled. So we took it upon ourselves to build a large-scale deep learning algorithm which analyzes 100% of the world's waste flow that comes from municipalities. So this adds up to like around 50 to 70 different classification of materials, like all kinds of PET, HDPE, aluminium, gray cardboard, white cardboard, brown cardboard, and the list is long. Metals, ferrous metals. And what if we create the system which not only analyzes what goes to this very large facility? So when trash gets picked up from our households, we feel that that's our job. We recycle it, so we put it in the right bags. But many a times they end up in really mixed belts in these very large facilities. You might have seen YouTube videos of waste flowing through this very large conveyor belts. And these industries are fairly blind, and they only rely on experienced people's expert judgment to create the waste mix. So purity is a very big issue in the chemistry of waste. So you can understand no two plastics are the same. You cannot just think that I can put all plastics together and it's get recycled. No, separation and sorting is a very important science, but it is done by a lot of experts manually. And we came into the play that we can analyze 100% of waste, and we can help sort it with robotic power plants, arms, and other air jets with a real-time API. But our main business model is we want to analyze and be the analytics platform for all of world's waste. And that's what we've been sort of building, this very large taxonomy. It highly inspires us, inspires the team we bring on board, and we feel we can really make an impact to build a more sustainable world. And this week has also been COP26 in Glasgow. It's in the backdrop. It's a major conversation point, and there are three very large stakeholders in this conversation, because let's not alone rely on technology. We need legislation, government support. There is something very interesting coming into play called extended producer responsibility, which is already taking place in UK, parts of EU, and a few states in United States of America, where these major producers, brand owners, they have to take a responsibility of how their product is recycled. And not just say that when you say this can be recycled on a certain box, it doesn't mean it can be. You almost have to be a scientist to recycle some of these products because they've got so many mixed materials. So you have to take responsibility what you write into this packaging, and government is not able to make any decisions on any kind of taxation or policies without any data. So we sit very uniquely in the intersection of regulators, producers, and the sorting facilities, and we hope for making a big impact in the carbon footprint of this $15 trillion industry of packaged goods of plastic.
Спасибо большое, Ambarish.
Ambarish, thank you very much. That is a very interesting and promising business model. Any waste management facility can connect to your platform and use computer vision tools to properly sort the garbage, understand the carbon footprint, understand how to recycle it better. Is that correct? Is that the correct understanding?
That's correct. Today, already the very large global waste conglomerates out of Europe and US are already using our platform. But not only can you do composition analysis, because these belts move at a speed of anything between 1 meter to 3 meters a second. So it's a lot of stuff. So not only can you understand the material composition, you can also understand the purity of the waste, the actual weight of the waste, and also the brands, so that you get to an idea that what kind of pollution and which kind of brands are actually more recyclable than the other, because I think that information needs to become more transparent for a better ESG policy. So we are certainly helping in that direction.
Спасибо большое, действительно впечатляюще.
Thank you very much. That is a very impressive business model. Waste management and waste recycling can be global. That's a great thing. My next question is to SaaS company, Shukri. A question to you again. We say that AI helps to resolve environmental problems, but AI is a very complicated algorithms, petabytes of data that are themselves creating a large carbon footprint. The United Nations research said that the IT consumption, the IT component, accounts for 10% of the consumption of all energy in the world. That is a lot. And I would like to ask you, you represent a very large company that works with the industry's level data processing. What is your take on this problem? What do you do to resolve it?
Yeah, well, it's a good question as well. Let me think of this. So, in a sense, there are three components for the how you tackle the ESG requirements of AI and the data and its interlinks with each other. For one, you have to look. The way we see it is that where we store the data, where we compose this data, where it sits and how it gets computed in is a big part of how we could improve the overall ESG footprint of the AI bill, if you put it that way. At the moment, we believe that cloud computing is probably one of the most reasonable way of elevating this particular footprint. Still, there's a lot of way to go until cloud computing would become really the preferential way of data lake presence, the data presence, and the way it gets computed in it. Still, there's a lot of organizations across the world that are reliant on their local storage of this data. So it's not as prevalent as it should be, and we believe that could help a lot in elevating that particular footprint and improving it. The other thing, which is, at least in the way we look at it, is very important, is the software component in itself. So the modern software builds and the way platforms are being constructed at the moment, it can help materially as well in improving the AI footprint and in putting the way the virtual machines are done, the architecture of this software, and the way it runs through decentralized computing that will effectively distribute that particular modeling computing across several machines, so that you don't get a lot of weight and a lot of consumption on specific areas within the overall infrastructure that you have. The way you build that software can help a lot in elevating as well that particular footprint in specific. And third of all is the usage of it, how you use it. So in many ways, I think with the advent of and the presence of open source and the way our AI assets are being created, a lot of people don't realize that there's a massive amount of work, hard work, usage being done on these machines and on that data. But many of those AI assets, those models, don't see the light of day, right? So people sit, they work on them, you've got plenty of models that gets created, and then you have champion modeling going on, but really the operationalization of these particular models is what this is where one of the hidden parts of this whole particular industry we're in. And model optimization, how you work on them, how you can create them, how you can optimize the usage and of this can help a lot as well in reducing that footprint. So that's the way how we in SAS look at it.
Thank you very much, Shukri. As Sber, we decided to calculate the carbon footprint of our AI models. I think that by 2022 we'll be able to show you how it actually works to decrease this carbon footprint, because it is pretty high. And if you if you create a great state-of-the-art model, but it gives you a minimal business effect or is not used used at all. The question is why it was created in the first place. And this is the question of efficiency. The economic efficiency and carbon efficiency are things that go hand in hand here, right? And one drives the other. I have a question to Andrey now and to Ambarish, to both of you. Many large corporations think, yeah, we would love to be a startup, you know, to have this quick, agile startup culture to deliver everything quickly. And many startups think it's a pity we're not a large organization with a lot of resources and the organization that can afford many things. So, Andrey, Ambarish, I would like to ask the question to Andrey first and then Ambarish. What could you recommend to large and largest corporations in terms of leveraging the AI for ESG in 2022, 2023, because you're in the avant-garde, you see the new business model, you see new technology models. A few pieces of advice, please.
Well, first off, we never wished we were a big corporation, frankly. I really enjoy being a startup, and I think this is a great mindset overall. As for what is blocking, I would say, the development of big companies, well, there are a lot of factors. I'd like to highlight just one. The lack of information transparency, internally and externally. A lot of big companies are operating based on a somewhat obsolete model where the company is kind of closed, contained in its own information and not sharing it with the outer world. And this is blocking development through communication with vendors and counterparties, because there's a lot of information that companies get from outside, not develop internally. And a lot of companies learn to absorb it correctly, filter it. Companies like Apple, for example, they acquire hundreds of startups every year, startups that previously worked with them as suppliers, and then they have dozens of thousands of other suppliers that they filter. Same goes for AI and ESG. If you provide more data to the outer world, there are more startups that can give you feedback, and based on that feedback, you can develop better. Keeping that expertise sealed, hidden within your company, it doesn't really make sense, and it can be costly. And also potential losses related to this disclosure of information, I think those risks are minimal as compared with the potential benefit that you will get with regard to your business development. And startups, conversely, in this regard, are much more open. There are a lot of startups that follow the so-called teal philosophy. They are very open to the world, and this really helps them power up their development, their growth. I think this is something that that large corporations could benefit from, could learn from. Sber, by the way, is building its ecosystem and is using this resource, I think, pretty extensively. Thank you very much. And what if a big corporation offered you to become a part of it? Oh, well, it depends on the terms and conditions. Understood. Ambarish, what would you recommend to large corporations?
I mean, my view is, building on Andrea's point, that, okay, we've seen some good examples, but actually there are a lot more bad examples of corporates and startups working together. And one of the reasons for that is, first of all, accountability and ownership. I think large companies, the direction they're going in, sometimes they go scattered about innovation, or they think of it either a scattered way or as something a department does on the side, and the procurement division looks at it and they negotiate a lot. Instead, it needs to be a lot more central as an approach, where you have almost board level clear accountability that this is what we will do in 2022, in 2023. You know, what is our skill set? What's the skill sets available in the market, and let's just go and source them. And when the sourcing process happens, one thing is very important is a sense of, if you really, really want talented companies to take interest in you, because today we are in an era of bigger opportunities thanks to technology for everybody. You cannot almost be a bully. So I think sense of equality and respect is very important for a large company and a startup. Also, a culture fit, often ignored. Like, can these two companies truly work together? You may have, and here you means I'm generalizing, but one may have all the financial resources in the world, but your culture may not be adaptable to the vision of the startup, and the startup may have the technology you exactly need. So when things work out, they not only work out for the hardcore technology regions, but actually they work out for the softer reasons. And the companies which look at the element of the human capital and the fit and the clear purpose, the path, the awareness of the problem is right at the top, they end up doing better strategic partnerships, and they have a lot better outcome. And the second point is, overall, statistically, like, large companies have a disadvantage. By the time a group of people book a meeting room, for 3 weeks later, a company will have come up with the solution. So it is important to realize that a lot of the innovation is always coming from smaller companies, which eventually get acqui-hired or they become very big. So I think it's important to realize that you may not have all the skill sets, and it's good to go out there and get the right people.
Спасибо, Ambarish. Да, действительно, культурологические вопросы — это огромная история.
Thank you very much. I think this is largely an issue of culture, these cultural issues of relations between large corporations and startups. It's only through proper cooperation that you can work out real synergy and actually help the world. My next question is for Tom. Tom, we have talked a lot about the E component, the S component, but very little about the G part. So in terms of governance, in terms of this G component, artificial intelligence and governance, how do you think they're interlinked? What kind of problems could there be, and how do we solve them?
Yes, governance, I think if we think of that broadly as the ethical guiding ethically how we do the things, and it could be not just by governments, but by companies and so on. Governance in the broad sense is absolutely essential for AI, because AI is a technology that amplifies things. It amplifies the choices you make. It has unintended consequences when used at scale. So as I will describe in my keynote, AI can be used and is being used by the platforms of the attention economy, like social media, to drive systems at such a scale that they're completely out of control and are doing planetary scale harm to the population. Now, this is actually, I like to think of this as very analogous to what we were seeing with climate change. There's an extraction industry that makes money by extracting from the commons fossil fuels, and an externality, emitting pollution, and an externality on the climate. Well, just as there needs to be a change in the formula that prices externalities into energy, there might want to be a change in the formula that prices in the human impact of the use of these economies of scale technologies like AI by companies like the attention economy. And what's interesting about AI is that, unlike something like fossil fuel, where you kind of have to have an external force to sort of, by regulation and so on, force this thing to do what you want, and it's often difficult to guide, the everyday activities by that kind of regulation. It is possible in AI to actually build in this balance of growth and the negative externalities, that sort of trade-off, into the very machinery of the machine learning. So like today, machine learning is often used to optimize only for growth. And in the attention economy, that means more usage, more viral activity, more addiction. Whereas in the negative externalities are well understood now, mental health, crazy thinking, and so on. Now, it turns out that the problem is that the AI was used to only amplify the growth, and the externalities weren't priced into the equation. So essentially, you can, and therefore should, engineer into the AI machinery itself factors that consider its consequences on human impact. And so, for instance, you can factor in whether it's causing someone to be addicted to a video game or not. Now, it turns out that if we think that way, if it's not just a battle of competing adversarial forces, but it's actually an engineering problem, a system engineering problem, then you can see how governance works at all these different levels. It, of course, starts at maybe even global governance, about setting policies and things, and maybe countries who establish the law, the regulatory frameworks within which companies work, the boards of directors and the executives of those companies who set policy. It goes all the way down through all of the incentives, all the way down to the data scientists who build AI models, because it's those AI models that are causing the optimization for growth at the expense of humanity. And that is why we can, in fact, create a kind of governance that's almost like an engineering science of governance. We can measure how well we're doing at the governance. Is it, in fact, improving the mental health, say, for instance, of the users or not? Is it, in fact, causing the kind of externalities we predict? And there's one other thing that happens. There's actually an incentive for the industry to change, despite the fact that this seems like get out of my world, I don't want to be regulated. But it turns out that none of these companies that are doing the large-scale harm to populations like Facebooks and so on all over the world, none of these companies actually can exist without a contract of trust with their users. And in fact, in AI, there's an exchange of values that says you get value from the data that's provided by the usage. So if there's a breakdown in trust, the people go away. And it's also true when we have breakdown in trust with governments. If we can't trust the governments to use AI responsibly, then they will revolt or reject it. But the more you can trust, if there's a contract of trust, you can have things like personal assistants that actually know a lot about your private life, because you can trust that's being protected by privacy laws. Then you'll be able to give more information and get more value back. So I see as a kind of a virtual circle, if we do it well, to turn around the sort of downward spiral that's going on right now. And again, the key here is just to realize that governance is at all these different levels of the system.
Спасибо большое, Том. Очень интересная концепция, очень интересная.
Thank you so much, Tom. This is a fascinating concept, a very interesting approach. Governance is basically an engineering problem. This is an interesting shift in gears.
Проблема системной инженерии.
That's right, system engineering. Regarding the ethical principles, building upon what Tom said, at Sber we adopted at our level. We combined with other companies in Russia into an AI alliance to align our principles. Then we signed this agreement. We had more than 20 companies signing this agreement. At the national level, we participate in discussions at UNESCO levels, the discussion of AI ethical principles. So I agree that there is a certain pyramid in how you talk about AI ethical principles and AI governance. The governance problem is a problem that needs to be described in engineering terms, otherwise we will not be able to work out a practical solution. Thank you very much for the insight, Tom. We have very little time left, and in that time I wanted to ask a question to our speakers and the audience. Very simple question.
Как вы считаете, чем будет заниматься
What do you think artificial intelligence will be doing in the next 10 years for ESG purposes? Let's imagine we are visionaries, well, our panelists are, and people in the audience try to join us in ruminating about what AI will be doing in the next 10 years for ESG. And while the audience are voting, very briefly, the same question to our panelists. We will start with Andrey, then Shukri, Ambarish, and Tom. Just a couple of words about the most promising tasks that AI will be solving in ESG by 2030. This is exactly what we've been working on. Artificial intelligence needs to ensure automated scoring, ESG scoring of companies. But you're about to complete it already. Be more visionary. No, I don't think we are there yet. There is still some room for ambition because we need to score companies and projects, and also ESG requirements are very dynamic. They are changing. So maximal granularity. Yes. Thank you. Shukri, what's your answer?
I think it will automatically define our ability of engagement with the outer markets. I think the AI models and will, to some extent, if we provide enough guidance and guardrails for them, they should be able to help us in automating a lot of the decisions we do as an organizations that at the moment we need boards and meeting rooms and a lot of these things to be able to do. I think that will create more nimbleness in decision making, enable us to react to market requirements that at the moment sometimes we don't see quickly enough, we don't react to it quickly enough. And I see that becoming a staple of organizations setup. AI will have a seat at the board.
Maybe you're talking about autonomous organizations. There's a concept that's blockchain and AI is actually...
Thank you very much. You just put a name on.
What about ESG? You've been talking about governance, but what about E and S?
I think that's part of the parcel of the components in general. That's what I meant, is that as an overall, they will be taking decisions as well on these, what things we should be investing in, what things we should be looking at. As a company, is our carbon footprint going in the right direction? Are we taking the right decisions? These will be part of it, I'm sure.
Great. Ambarish, what do you think?
So, AI is like a platform phrase. A lot of underlying technologies coming into play with, advanced cloud computing, better edge machines, 5G, and it all is leading to basically humans will be enabled to harness vast amounts of data and make breakthroughs in several areas. And if harnessed the right way, the emerging technologies with AI, it could be transformational to tackle some of the world's most pressing environmental challenges, which include clean distributed energy grids and better urban mobility and precision agriculture, sustainable supply chains, and overall environmental monitoring and informants with weather prediction. And the list is long. But at this pace currently, over the next 10 years, is to still acquire a huge amount of data from as many sources, and that acquisition and making of the models being more precise, which is relying on the ecosystem of the developing technologies.
Thank you, Ambarish. Tom, what do you think?
Well, I think Mitra's point about all the ways that the AI technology is going to make us be smarter, make smarter decisions, optimize processes, for environmental protection and so on. And I think that's going to happen. But the interesting thing is there's another side of this, which is while we're simultaneously empowering scientists and engineers to invent all these cool things with this new technology, we're also at the same time destroying the epistemological contract that society has with science. Half of the U.S. and half of a lot of Europe and so on doesn't even believe in Brazil, India. They don't even believe in the science anymore because of the social media propaganda and so on. And that's been driven by AI. What's interesting thing, I'm hopeful. I think that in 2030, the way it will happen is we'll have the AI not only for individual intelligence to make, say, scientists, engineers better at doing their job, but also collective intelligence. It hasn't been done yet, but if it's done properly, that same awareness of large amounts of data and the same AI application can give all of us a sense of how we could collectively change the world's opinions about the climate, for example. how can we collectively change how we're taking care of our material resources? What is the carbon impact of the things I do on the global consequence? Basically, they're like cognitive prosthesis for us as humans to help us see the big picture.
Okay, thank you very much. And покажите, пожалуйста, результаты голосования аудитории.
Thank you so much. Can we see the voting results? What does the audience think? Okay, people in the audience slightly disagree with the speakers. They believe that artificial intelligence will primarily be reducing harmful impacts on the environment. The second most popular answer is reduction of resource consumption, and third, ensuring equal rights and opportunities for all people, and solving problems related to climate change and human capital development. Same amount of votes. So there is not alignment with what you said. It's such a huge, such a vast topic. No one knows what the next 10 years will bring, of course. But the possibility to talk about this, to share our views, and to take away this idea that we can do something in the next 10 years to make the world a better place. This is a big, optimistic question, I think, for everyone to ponder on. As Steve Jobs said, we are in this world in order to make this world better. Otherwise, why are we here at all? Thank you very much and have a great day.